Lyena Strelkoff, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Get Foxy show with us today. I appreciate you being here.
Oh, truly my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, usually the way I kind of start things off is I ask folks about how they got into their profession and whether their profession chose them or whether you chose it. But I just read your blog post on the Green Ninja. And so it sounds, after reading that, I don't know if I can really ask you that question. You were, with the theme of that blog post, you are just who you are meant to be. So can you give my listeners a little bit of insight as to who you are and who you're meant to be?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question that my work in the world chose me. No question at all. I started out wanting to be a performer, wanting to be an actor. My undergraduate degree is in that. And then many years went by and I was doing that work in the world sort of semi-professionally, very respected, but not very well known. And then I climbed a tree while I was on a date when I was in my early 30s. And a branch broke and I was paralyzed from the waist down. And if you had asked me before that happened, what was my worst fear in the world, paralysis would have been it. And here I was in that position. But the funny thing is that it was all sort of part of the same trajectory. And right from the moment that I started to fall while I was still in the air, the experience itself began teaching me. It began showing me how to not only live with this tragic change, but how to use it as a catalyst. And so when I got out of rehab, I was in the hospital for 2 months. I immediately took to the stage because that's what I knew. I had never told my own stories before, but I was having this extraordinary experience that I had to share with people. So that led to a full-length one-woman show that led to 5 national tours. While I was touring, I was meeting people all around the country who were also suffering with all kinds of challenges in their life. Many had nothing to do with disability or injury, but with divorce or changes in career or mental health issues. And I knew now a way of turning those experiences into gold, into what propels us forward instead of what holds us back. And I couldn't bear to see all of this suffering and not share what I knew. So that led me to start a coaching practice. The performing led me to speaking all over the country. So there is no question that it chose me. And that's what I now do in the world. It's wonderful.
What is caterpillar soup?
Caterpillar Soup is the one-woman show that I wrote and toured around the nation for 5 years. The title refers to the experience of a caterpillar who, upon instinct, goes into the cocoon, and before it can become a butterfly, it has to actually dissolve. It becomes cellular soup. I used to think that a caterpillar goes in and then sprouts wings on a body it already has. And that is so not what happens. The caterpillar has to experience the loss of everything it's known itself to be in order to become this new thing. And that's exactly what I experienced. So Caterpillar Soup the play takes place on the day that it starts on the day that I fell and ends on the 2-year anniversary, and tells the story of that extraordinary transformation that I experienced.
Wow. See, I think there's so much value in telling that story. There are so many people that are stuck in different places in their lives that by hearing this story can experience their own transformation. That's huge stuff.
Carrie, that's exactly what happened. And I have to tell you that I didn't know that going in. Like, I had this compulsion to tell this story because it was amazing. I was living this amazing experience. And I wanted to just tell everybody I knew about it. And I had this tiny inkling that it could be valuable to others. This tiny inkling, like, it can't be that I'm the only one who thinks this is cool. It can't be. I had no idea what was going to happen. And when I took the stage with this show, I mean, Caterpillar Soup in its initial run, we were supposed to do 3 weekends as a workshop. We extended 5 times. The initial run was 6 months. I immediately started to be invited to speak at colleges and universities in my area. Then I was invited to a theater in Alaska. And at that point, I became a nationally touring artist. And we did 5 national tours of the show. People were coming to see the original run 3 and 4 times. I mean, I just never in a million years imagined that. So it really, you're so right about the power that it had for other people. Even though my story was totally different from theirs, they saw themselves in that story and were able to be transformed by it as well.
That's huge. I just had an interview with a gal by the name of Alana Pratt not too long ago, and we were talking about authenticity and vulnerability and sharing our struggles in a way that people can relate to. And I ended up having to kind of go through this myself when my oldest son was diagnosed with leukemia, and he's doing well now. But during that whole struggle, I had to kind of learn, wow, I'm not Superman. I have to be able to show my vulnerability, and going through that process and learning, geez, people actually relate more with me when I share my struggles than they do when I'm trying to keep it all together and be Mr. Perfect.
Yeah.
And so being able to hear that struggle really, I would think, makes you very relatable.
That is certainly the feedback I have gotten. Yeah, for sure. For sure. No. And I think you're right about that is where the power is. All humans, nobody gets a pass. Nobody gets through their life without being challenged by things. That's just not how it works. And the challenges are going to look different, one human to the next, but nobody gets a pass. And so if we can hold out our hands to each other and walk together through these difficult experiences, if we can share what that's like. And those of us who, you mentioned the Green Ninja piece. I didn't know that I had this power inside me. I didn't know that I could tell stories in this way that would change people's lives. I didn't know I had this wisdom inside me. It took becoming paralyzed to discover this about myself. But once I had, there was no other choice to make but to make that available to whoever wanted it around me. And that's how we thrive, by being with each other in these experiences and sharing the self-awareness that we have or the insights that we glean. That's how we do it. That's how we lift each other up.
What is the Shero's way? What is that philosophy, and how did you go about developing it?
Yeah. So a couple of years after I was injured, Caterpillar Soup had already opened, and my life in basically every way was turning to gold, not in spite of being paralyzed, but because I had been paralyzed. So my mental health improved after I was injured. My ability to be in intimate relationship improved after I was paralyzed. Here I became now this, successful performing artist after I was paralyzed. I was sitting at dinner one night with my mother, and I was marveling to her that something so devastating could have so much positive impact on a life. And my mother said, yes, it is amazing. But how? How are you doing this? And my mother's a concentration camp survivor. She was a child in Mauthausen. She was born a refugee. The first 20 years of her life are filled with such extraordinary hardship and horror. And I know that 70 plus years later, she still has nightmares about these things. She still carries those wounds in various ways. And for her to ask me, how are you doing this? Man, I could not let that question go unanswered. I had to know. I had to know. And I didn't know in that moment. And so from that point on, I started deconstructing everything that I was doing and not doing. Like, what were my habits? What were my beliefs? What were the shifts in belief that had to happen? What were the attitudes? What actions was I taking? What actions was I staying away from? And I started to catalog all of this. And over the years, it became clear that there was an actual approach that I was taking. This did not happen by accident, and it absolutely did not happen by doing what is instinctual. So once I had that catalog, I named it. I looked at the whole thing and said, wow, this is a way of life, not just for dealing with an acquired disability or dealing with a major tragedy. This is a way of life for dealing with any challenge that we face at any degree. And it's called the Shero's Way.
Man, talk about a serious amount of introspection and self-awareness that you had to have. I mean, that in and of itself is a discipline, I would think.
I think that's very true. You know, I was actually very lucky that I was in my 30s already when I was injured. You know, when I was in rehab, I was with a lot of young men, mostly because spinal cord injuries highly disproportionately affect more men than women. And many of them were 18, 19, 20 years old. They had no idea yet who they were, what their life was about. I was 33. I had been in and out of therapy since I was 18. I had done a tremendous amount of healing work already. I knew myself really well. I had a very well-established spiritual practice. I had a lot of pieces in place by the time that I entered this experience. And that was an enormous gift, not only to me, but as it turns out, to everyone who's been touched by my work, because I could not have done it if I had been injured 10 or 15 or 20 years earlier. It just wouldn't have been possible.
What are some of the most common questions that you get about your work?
What are some of the most common questions I get about my work? Wow. I don't know the answer to that question.
I've got you stumped. Wow.
Yeah. I think that, well, for one thing, I think there's a question of, is the Shero's Way only for women? Because of the title. And in fact, it's not. I do work primarily with women. That's where my resonance is. Mm-hmm. So there's no question that women are the vast majority of my community and my clients. But the Shero's Way, that's an approach for everybody. And the reason that I chose that language, so while I was in the hospital, I started to see, actually even before I got to the hospital, while I was lying on the dirt, you know, under the tree that I fell out of, I started to see that I was on some kind of journey. Like something was happening. I had fallen 25 feet into some other world that was different than the world I started the day in. And later in that journey, while I was in the hospital, I remember watching The Lord of the Rings with my sisters on Thanksgiving. They had both flown in from overseas where they lived, and they spent Thanksgiving with me in the hospital. And I wept through the whole movie. I'd seen it before, twice. But this time I wept beginning to end. And I felt like Frodo. And that felt a little bit absurd to me. You know, like it felt sort of grandiose and I don't know, self-aggrandizing. But there was something about being thrust into this situation that you don't want to be in, that where the stakes are super, super high, and you have to complete this journey somehow. And the journey feels impossible. Feels impossible. And yet, these allies, these friends, these supporters start to show up, and here you are, you're on the journey, and miracles start to happen. And I was already seeing this. So the idea of the hero's journey was present for me as I was watching my own journey unfold. And then, again, years later, I did some study on Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And there's a moment in the hero's journey, as it was mapped by Joseph Campbell, where there's sort of big central crisis, and you slay the dragon. That's sort of the metaphor. You slay the dragon. And in some of those stories, that is actually what happened. They slayed the dragon. And there was something about that didn't resonate for me. And when I started codifying the Shero's way, codifying what I had done, cataloging it, I realized that I had a very different relationship with my core challenge. I tried to best paralysis. I tried to take it down. And that backfired in a huge way. I mean, it made me physically ill. And what I realized was that I had to enter into a dance with paralysis. Like, it was here. There was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't undo what had happened. It was here now. So what was the relationship that I was going to have with it? And taking this more relational model instead of an adversarial model, that's what opened all the doors. So when I named the Shero's way, and specifically chose Shero, it's because I wanted to emphasize relationship over conflict, over battle, over aggression, over adversity. I wanted to emphasize relationship. So it's definitely not reserved for women, but it has this core element that people, that we all presume to be female, this emphasis on relationship, this emphasis on negotiation, on collaboration. So that's why.
Yes, that makes complete sense. I mean, you're kind of speaking my language as a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, where this hero's journey where you're slaying and you're overcoming and you're working against something. This is a very yang type of aspect, whereas what I'm hearing from you is something more in the yin type aspect, where yes, there's dance, there's being led, there's being surrendering and accepting and creating more of a relationship, as opposed to just lording over and conquering and slaying.
Right, exactly. And I'll tell you, the Chinese medical doctor actually was one of the catalysts of that shift for me. Because I grew up with alternative medicine. My mother was a pioneer in the health food industry. She's the original importer of Siberian ginseng from the Soviet
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I grew up long before it was fashionable, long before health food tasted good. That's what I grew up with. And I had a homeopathic doctor. I was introduced to acupuncture by the time I was 13. This is a long time ago. This is in the 70s. So when I was in the hospital for paralysis, for breaking my back, I mean, that world, surgeries and MRIs, and it was like speaking Chinese to me. On the flip side, I couldn't understand what was happening. That was so foreign to me. And obviously absolutely necessary. I had, broken bones and a collapsed lung, and I had things that had to be managed, dealt with. But once I was in rehab, I really struggled with the Western medical model. And the hospital that I went to, Craig Hospital in Colorado, has a complementary medical program. And so I had access. I could request a Chinese medical doctor, which of course, as soon as I knew I could, I was like, please, I need a Chinese medical doctor. And so he came to my room in my hospital, and he examined me, and I was terribly ill because I was trying to fight this experience. I was trying to control my emotions around it. I was trying to control the outcome. I was going to be in charge. And I couldn't get out of bed. And he came and examined me from a Chinese medical perspective and said, listen, your attempt to control this experience is congesting every organ you have. Like you cannot survive if you do it this way. And he did a whole bunch of acupuncture to loosen those places up. And that's when I realized that regardless of my intentions about recovery or walking again or anything like that, I was going to have to allow my authentic experience. And that was the beginning of stepping into that relationship.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so I love hearing stories like that about how acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine can help somebody through their adversities. I love it. So
Yeah.
thank
I
you for
imagine
sharing
you
that.
do. I imagine you do. To hear something that affirms what you have come to know so deeply and come to experience so many times over, I'm sure, and the clients that you've had over the years. I have no doubt that you see this all the time and wanting the world to know that that is available. You can have that. Anyone. You can step into the office and have that. And it's very similar to how I feel about the Shero's Way when I see people going through these challenges and really struggling and suffering. And there's nothing that, what hurts us hurts us. I can't take that away. Like there was nothing that was going to make your son's illness not devastating, not painful, not terrifying. But what else can it be? It can be this catalyst. It can lift both you and him up.
You bet.
And that, like for me, I want everybody to have that. I want everybody to know. I want them to have access to it. And I want them to be inspired to say, yes, I want to do that. I want to explore that. I want to have that kind of experience. What do I need to do?
Yeah. Well, just to switch gears a little bit here, what does Foxy and being Foxy mean to you, Lyena?
When you sent me that question as a possible question way back when we first started talking, I really had to think about that because it's not, honestly, Foxy is not a word that I use very often to describe myself or anyone else for that matter. And so I really had to think, like, what does that mean to me? And I realized that I think Foxy for me is about, it's about inner light. It's about life force. And when that life force is stimulated and activated and flowing, that shines through us. And that is the foxiest thing I know when I see that in others, that light shining through them. And it does not matter the package that light is coming through. It's not about my shape or my size or my weight or my complexion, or it's not about any of that. When I think about some of the times when I felt the most beautiful or when that was reflected back to me, I was actually in the hospital. I had just had surgery on my back. It was about 3 days later. I still had tubes coming out of me. I still had a chest tube. I was a mess. But the fall for me was a deeply spiritual experience. And I was still carrying that energy. And so I was shining. And I myself didn't realize it, but I saw the effect of it. Not only from my friends who were coming to visit me and just walking into the room and blown away and sharing that with me, speaking to me about, you are glowing. Like, we expected you to look like a truck hit you, and you are glowing. But even the staff at the hospital, like, as I would improve, they would move me from ward to ward because I needed less care and I was at less risk, things like that. And staff from previous floors would come and take their breaks in my room. They would just come and be there for 15 minutes and, maybe chat with me a little. Like, they weren't soaking me up. You know, they weren't sucking anything from me, but they just wanted to be in my presence. And I remember at the time thinking, this seems odd. This doesn't seem like something I would expect to have happen. And so in that moment, man, physically, I was a mess. You know, I'm sure that I looked dreadful, but that light, whew, everybody wanted to be in the presence of that. So I think for me, that's what Foxy's really about.
Mm-hmm. Who, in your opinion, embodies foxiness?
Oh my gosh.
Who comes to mind for you?
I mean, so many people that I know, who you probably wouldn't know though, you know, like I know so many women actually who carry that. Let's see, you know who I was recently on stage with is Marissa Tomei. I was invited to do to perform in a benefit production of the Vagina Monologues for V-Day Santa Monica back in February. And I shared the stage that night with Jane Fonda and Rosario Dawson. And yeah, like incredible talent. I, in fact, sat on stage. I had Jane Fonda on my right and Wanda Sykes on my left. And Marissa, whom I've always been a fan of, ever since she did A Different World, you know, I think I was probably 10 or something. I've always been her fan. And there is a light in her. For this particular production, she wasn't all glammed out. In fact, she came on stage, she was wearing her glasses, she was barefoot, she was wearing a black t-shirt and a sort of this red wide skirt. I mean, many of the women on stage, including myself, were pretty glammed up, and Marissa was not. But just talking to her, being with her, being in her presence, that light was coming through her. Even when she was confused, you know, even when she didn't know what was going on, or she missed a cue, or that was always there. So I think she's a great example of that.
Mm-hmm. What would be the one piece of advice that you would have for the Vulpanistas, those followers of all things Foxy, about how to cultivate that light, how to stay foxy?
You know, if I look at my own life, you know, I have a business, I have a coaching practice, I have a speaking career, I'm writing a book, I have a 7-year-old son, my elderly mother lives with us, my husband is here, he also has a business that he's running. And I have a major disability that requires a ton of my attention. So my life is very, very, very full. And if I look at what dims my light, it's things like, one, my inner critic. That's an amazing dampener, really fast. It's interruption. It's having whatever I had planned for the day or for the moment waylaid by, you know, an emerging something or other from some corner of my life. It's all the things I don't have control over. So to cultivate that inner light and not have it be constantly extinguished or dampened, I had to learn to let go of control and instead be in command. There is a huge difference between command and control. And control is not possible, but command is, even when things are out of control. So I would recommend cultivating that ability to be in relationship, whatever challenge is floating forward in life, big or small, and to recognize that even though we don't have often a say of what's coming toward us, we always have a choice about who we bring to that experience. The me, the us, the we that we bring to that experience. That's where the command is. Who am I going to be in this moment? How am I going to respond to this moment? And when I can do that, and when I can stay in that place, then I'm always feeding that light. I'm always allowing that light to, because it's self-generating, it's self perpetuating. I don't have to boost it up. I don't have to get in there and like push on it and make it happen. I just have to get out of the way. So if I can let that happen and stay in command in my life, and that's a skill. That's not something that we just choose to do and then we know how to do it. That's a lot of what I teach women for sure. But that's what I would recommend the most, because from that place of command, that's when we can choose self-care. That's when we can have boundaries that matter. That's when we can make the best choices for ourselves. We cannot do that when we are sort of ruled by the circumstance that we're in, or the circumstance that's presenting itself. Then we're not making good choices. We can't. We don't have the resources to do it. So that's a particular flip from control to command that I would really recommend.
Speaking of your teaching, how can people get a hold of you if they want more information or they'd like to interact with you more?
I have a website, lyenastrelkoff.com. You can find me there. On that website, there is, there's a page about my coaching, and you can actually apply for a free discovery session. I would be happy to make myself available to folks who want to explore what's possible here. In fact, I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry to make what I've learned available to others. So that was really my great joy to say, please reach out to me. I would love to receive you and to be there. And actually, anyone who goes to the website, I have a free gift for everyone that I would love to offer. It's a short story, about a 15-minute story. It's called Death by Positivity. And it's all about how forcing ourselves to be positive is really getting in the way of where we want to go.
Excellent. Well, I will include your website in the show notes. And for the listeners, yes, please get a hold of Lyena. Take her up on that offer of a discovery session, because you might just experience some outstanding transformation when you have a mentor like her.
Thank you.
You bet. And I'm looking at the time now, and I can't believe it's already gone by so doggone fast. Here we are. So, Lyena, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you are making one heck of an impact on the world. So, God bless you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Terry. It was my pleasure.